So welcome again. Thanks for sticking around. I want to talk tonight about values, which is something we often don't talk about here, rarely talk about here, at least directly. And I began thinking about this in terms of what is the foundation of our ethics. Without our ethics, we really aren't walking this path. Ethics are critical to the teachings of the Dharma of the Buddha. But what's the sort of foundation of our ethics? And it occurred to me that we need to talk about values and what we usually refer to as our value system, even though we don't often articulate that. This is from the Buddha. The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into character. So watch the thought and its ways with care, and let it spring from love born out of concern for all beings. So you may recall that 3 of the Eightfold Path are ethical steps on the path: wise speech, wise action, and wise livelihood. And then in addition, I think we could argue that the Brahma Viharas of compassion, loving kindness, equanimity, and sympathetic joy all contain positive values or also connote positive values. So that's really the topic I want to spend some time on tonight. But what about these values? I mean, where do they come from? I mean, are they inborn? Are they hardwired? Or do we come into the world with them? I mean, I think there's some evidence that we at least come into the world with a predisposition for pro-social values, things like loyalty, compassion, altruism, and so forth. They have to probably be supported by the community, but all of those and many others probably provided some evolutionary advantage to our ancient ancestors. So I think there is at least a predisposition there. But also we derive our values, I think, from our family, from our community at large, from the media, from those around us who we surround ourselves with, from our spiritual path. There are lots of ways in which we acquire our values over the course of our lifetime. And then, of course, there's those individuals. There are those individuals whose values are absent or lacking. Certainly positive values are absent or lacking. It involves criminal activity and the like. But I think the bottom line is that no ethics, no path. Without an ethical foundation, there's really not much to stand on in terms of our walking this path. And I would draw a distinction between sort of outside and expressed values, those that we're fully aware of, and those would be the decisions we make and the decisions by which we live our lives, and those that are sort of internalized, maybe unconscious, if you will, those that we aren't well articulated. Philip Moffat, who's a Dharma teacher in this tradition, says that people who pay attention to inner priorities or values are more effective in their lives. And I think if we're living a life that is congruent with our values, with our goals in life, then we really are supporting our path. That's really where we want to be. If we're living a life that is out of sync with our values, that we're behaving in ways, acting in ways, speaking in ways that is out of sync with our values, it's really going to be hard to maintain our focus on the path and our advancement on the path. So values are absolutely critical as an underpinning to this journey that we're all on. And they really guide us day to day. I mean, if you think about it, how many times a day do we have to make decisions that are values-based? Everything from a common courtesy to a decision about whether to remind the clerk that they gave you too much change, to how we treat other people, how we treat ourselves. It's a constant our actions daily are constantly informed by our values, whether we take time to consciously reflect on that or not. And what we're trying to do here is behave in ways and make choices and decisions in ways that reduce our suffering and the suffering of others. So we refrain from thoughts, words, deeds, and actions which cause suffering. That becomes part of the ethical foundation of our practice. And our values, both internal and external, conscious and unconscious, really support our physical and mental and emotional well-being. They bring consistency and continuity to our lives. So there's a flow to them. There's a flow to our life. If I'm living my values, if I've articulated my values and I'm living my values, then there's an ease with which I can sort of engage with the world because I have a roadmap. I have some guidance. I have an internal map which tells me that I'm on the right path with regard to how I treat others, how I treat the planet, how I treat animals, how I treat myself. So that they really reflect this ethical foundation, as I said a few moments ago. We have in the past had a precept ceremony here. There are 5 lay precepts in our tradition, and they are simply the ethical foundation, one variation of that ethical foundation of our practice. You recall that they have to do with not speaking that which is untrue, not taking that which is not freely given, not stealing, not abusing intoxicants, not engaging in sexual misconduct, and not engaging in harm, killing, harming others, other sentient beings. So I want to just talk for a few minutes about some of the values by which we live our lives with greater authenticity and satisfaction. How do we sort of steer this ship in a way that keeps us on our path? And the first one, and I think probably, in my view, perhaps the most important, if we could say that, is wise speech. Because so much of what we say can either cause suffering or reduce suffering. You know, how do we speak? Do we speak with compassion? Do we speak with thoughtfulness and awareness? Do we speak with mindfulness in a way that reflects an open heart, a caring for self and others? So wise speech is a very important ethical and value-based practice that I think is extremely important. And this includes expressing even difficult topics with as much kindness as possible. It doesn't mean we go around just saying nice things all the time. But it says that when we're met with a challenge, that we're met with a difficult situation, that our speech is grounded in kindness, it's grounded in compassion. So that even if we have to speak that which is difficult, which we all do ultimately, we don't do it in a hostile, vindictive, vengeful way. If our ego gets into the picture, it very often interferes with wise speech. It interferes with some of our other ethical principles, because then it becomes about me. It becomes about holding on and maintaining that sense of self, however false it might be, and not being able to move beyond that sort of ego-driven need to protect that sense of self. Because the ego is always going to strive for acceptance, approval, popularity, even if it's contrary to our authenticity or our well-being. And then we really can get into trouble. We talk about that a lot. We talk about the suffering that comes with paying homage to the ego. And this is opposed to things like honesty, kindness, compassion, which may run contrary to the needs or the wishes of the ego. but keep us more focused on our path. So again, kindness is central to all that we do and say. And I don't mean this in sort of a tit-for-tat way, like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, or you be nice to me and I'll be nice to you. That's sort of superficial kindness. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about kindness as niceness. You know, niceness can be polite but inauthentic, and often is. Very often it belies what we're truly feeling. So kindness is not synonymous with niceness. So giving difficult feedback to a friend can be done in a kind way, but in an authentic way. And ultimately, this leads us to a greater sense of connection and relatedness to others. I mean, again, we're social creatures. It's critical that we foster those connections. We require them, we need them, we thrive from them. And leading a values-based, ethically based, authentic life will assure that we're connecting in a meaningful, deeper way with each other. And seeing that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, again, moving beyond the ego, that we're all interconnected. You know, if you think about how many people contribute to what you had for dinner tonight, you know, the chain, the person that cultivates the seeds, the farmer that plants them, the person that harvests them, the person that prepares the food for shipment, the person that brings it to the grocery store, stocks the store, checks you out. I mean, the list goes on and on. It just is a metaphor for that sense of interconnection. Just think about the food we eat. There's no way we could survive easily without that network of interconnectedness. And that's just one example. But keeping in mind that that sense of connection is an antidote to the aloneness, that sort of existential quandary that we all live with, of feeling and being alone, that sense of connection and acknowledging that interconnection is really a way of affirming that we're not alone, in that sense that we have each other to rely on. I think creativity is another way of expressing our values, of finding our values, of cultivating our values. You know, find a creative outlet, a way to express your values. You know, cook a meal, dance, take a walk, read a good book, connect with a friend, feed your spirit. You know, do whatever it is to sort of cultivate that inner sense of creativity, the joy of that, the joy of creation. Is affirming, it's life affirming, it's affirming of our value system, I think. When we talk about right livelihood, again, we're talking about aligning our values with how we make our living or how we engage in our livelihood. So we want our values to reflect that. And that can be challenging in this world. I mean, there's a lot of unethical behavior that goes on in the world of commerce. And how do we interface with that? How do we deal with that if we're in that world? You know, what is our obligation to ourselves to try to live an authentic, value-based life in the context of an environment which may be somewhat toxic or ethically challenged? But it's important in that context, I think, to seek out people that share our values, to avoid people that are toxic, to avoid toxic media, of which there's a tremendous amount. I mean, this provides us with no benefit. So in terms of again, how do we spend our time? Where do we put our energy? Where do we put our emphasis? Does it reflect a positive value system? Does it reflect an ethical foundation? It's very hard to stay on this path without that, as I've said. And then wise action, which keeps our heart open, how we choose to act in an ethically wise way. Continuing to learn and grow and foster community. These are all forms of wise action, which I think reinforce and affirm our values, our deeper values. And then, of course, the value of living in the moment, living in the present moment, which is what our mindfulness practice is about. And how if we're in a value congruent way with our lives and how we live our lives, that's so much less challenging to do, is to be in the moment, because we're not conflicted. We're not in a constant internal struggle with ourselves and our values, if our values are out of whack. And again, self-care becomes part of this as well. The value of self-care having to do with taking care of ourselves, diet, exercise, sleep, relaxation, maintaining our health, all aspects of self-care. So by clarifying our values, by practicing the precepts and the ethics component of the Eightfold Path and the other aspects of the Eightfold Path as well, and the Brahma Viharas, we begin to really live our practice. We really begin to live a value-based life that is informed by the ethics that the Dharma teaches, and how much easier it is for us to progress on the path. So what I'd like to do is do an exercise, have us do an exercise together. And you'll see at the top, just go ahead and identify, read the list, identify and circle your top 5 core values. And then if you're sharing, just pass it on to your partner. Maybe do it with a different symbol or something. And then we're gonna talk about these. Once you and your partner have both finished with your values, go to the questions at the bottom of your sheet. Those are your discussion questions. How do these values impact your daily life? Have they changed or evolved over the course of your adult life? And how do these values support your meditation practice and your spiritual path? Okay. Anyone willing to share some thoughts or reactions to the exercise, or anything that came up for you? Judy has the mic. If you just raise your hand, she'll bring you the microphone. How was that, John?
Oh my God, thank you. We found the absence of curiosity where we had to fill in next to the question mark.
As a value?
As a value, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's both sustaining in yourself and attractive in others. And seems to be part of the tradition, so to speak, as far as I know it.
Yeah. Good. Thanks. Other thoughts? Anyone find that their values have evolved over at least their adult life? Cecilia?
I marked open-mindedness. I think most of us in here weren't raised as Buddhists, so that almost has to be a given that we were raised in one tradition and then you find somehow an opening into Buddhism, and the open-mindedness comes along with that, and adaptability.
Thank you. Charlotte?
And I think the practice really encourages open-mindedness. I feel like I'm much more conscious of that from things that I've heard in Dharma talks here of really thinking about what's going on with other people when they say or do things that seem odd.
Was that one of the ones that you identified?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I think with that can come a sense of acceptance. Acceptance as things are. I'm open to what is, rather than sort of a more rigid style of thinking. So I think I think your point's a good one. Other thoughts?
I guess I think that things change over a period of time, whether it's you're in the workforce or out of the workforce. I do
Yeah.
a lot of global work, so when I'm in Africa, some of the values change when I'm in different settings at different times, depending on who I'm with. I don't think that's a bad thing or a good thing, but you just may be more exposed to certain values in certain times in certain places. And so I don't know that we have a core set that you stay by throughout your adult life, because I think they change depending on the situation you're in.
Good, thank you.
I was really glad to see humor as a value. I never really thought of humor as being a value, but the older I get, the more important it is to me to have a sense of humor. And I think without a sense of humor, it's like I keep saying to myself, the only choice I have is how graciously I do this,
Right.
So thank you for putting that one on there.
Good, thank you. Suzanne.
I appreciate the list, Jeff, and it became more difficult to choose just 5. And as we were working on them together, I found so many of them were so integrated and interrelated that it was really hard to separate them.
Good
Because
point.
so many of them work together. So that was all I wanted to share.
Yeah, lots of overlap. We could probably boil it down to maybe a third of those, but I wanted to be as exhaustive as I could. Other observations? Yes, Judy?
Yeah, it is difficult to just pick it all apart. But when I think about my life, early on, I was more compliant and responsible because I was taught those things.
Right.
And I was like trying to be a good girl. And then later in my life, words like courage and less so adaptability, but more so actually true compassion and some of kind of like these higher level moral development kinds of concepts that we're each going to feel differently.
Right.
But I do think that there's like maturity. Well, all of these words, I think, can be taken probably with greater and lesser degrees of maturity.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you for your time and attention, and we'll see you next week.